Hello, it's part 2 and welcome of the Panzer 1941 DLC. Last time in the series we tackled the Balkan menace and started the slitted endeavor of Barbarossa in the mission of WWII. And who'd have guessed this Soviet thing is becoming a big success and we'll cover 6 missions more here. This time we actually get a choice between 2 branches, 3 missions fighting for Army Group North, which will take us on a tour of the Baltic states and Leningrad, and 3 with Army Group Center with a plunge through Belarus and Western Russia. Actually, there is no commitment and you can mix and match the thing because after every mission you get the same choice of flipping to the other side. I mean, the Army Group, not the Soviets. Overall, I found North to be easier, mostly because of the somewhat straightforward Tallinn mission, but I also appreciated more variety in the environments there. From the Soviet Navy in the Baltic Sea to the Soviet engineers deep in the forests around Novgorod await you up in the north. In the center, it's more what you would expect in a mission in the Soviet Union, i.e. plains, occasional forests, and strategy built around crossing major rivers. At the same time, I found opposition to be much stiffer there, and you might actually get stuck if you overextend yourself and get into these attrition fights against superior Soviet tanks. Next up, this section of the DLC introduces a new character. Please give your applause to Lieutenant Clumsy Gerhard. Hello. Here's the general staff equivalent of a giant noob, and you know what? He trusts intelligence reports. In any case, I really enjoyed the contrast between the greenhorn Gerhard and the well-seasoned Wagner, and I think they do make a pretty nice duo together. I really look forward to more of their interactions. Now on to an actual mechanical innovation that has come with these missions. And obviously it's the bulldozers you can use to plop airfields anywhere. They are occasionally necessary and sometimes offer really nice tactical options. Obviously you can set up an airfield where you don't have access to one, but I have also plopped them next to existing airfields just to expand their capacity. I think this adds a new dimension to how you conduct your operations here, and I really enjoy using them, even though I think the game is slightly too generous with these tractors. But hey, you do have to introduce the concept, don't you? Also, these things are very realistic. Germans did rely on these mobile, deployable airfields on the Soviet-German front. And finally, given how different the war in the Soviet Union is from virtually everything else we've seen so far, what with the long distances you have to cover, I found myself changing my approach to my core artillery. If you've been watching my videos, you know that I'm a huge fan of it, and because of the very dynamic and mobile nature of Soviet missions, I've found towed guns to be rather underwhelming, because they occupy many cool slots and are hardly ever there when you need them. So I've shifted my focus towards Wolfram and 40, which are wonderfully mobile, and occasional Stugs, which aren't as great, but they are cheap. Because towed artillery still has the advantage of range, and you do need it sometimes. I only take the 17cm and 21cm heavy guns into my battles. All of that 15cm and 10.5cm nonsense is comparatively useless in my opinion. And now for the missions themselves. First up, let's deal with the Army Group Center missions, and the first one of those is Minsk 1941, which is this little bit of foreshadowing. What do you mean? I was supposed to return there later? Who knows? Anyway, the rule of thumb for this and the next mission is going to be go for the bottom. Alright, thumbs and bottoms are probably not the best equipment for conducting the biggest land operation in human history, but the point is that the scenario kinda suggests that you should go north of the river. The free armored train kinda suggests that. By the way, seriously consider throwing it out. It's kinda not great at this point. Plus, the northern objectives seem to be closer there. And as is common in these kinds of games, it's probably not the easiest way of advancing towards Minsk. The Soviets have many tanks in the flat area north of Minsk, where they will be able to fully exploit their superior armor. On the other hand, if you approach from the south, you will be able to block block the enemy tanks from crossing the river, and once your infantry takes over Minsk, it is in a perfect position to defend against tank attacks. Of course, it is a defended river crossing you have to overcome, and the city is well covered by counter-battery fire and AA guns. This means that you should bring as much artillery, long-range artillery, to the battle as possible. Have at least 3 17 or 21 centimeter guns to suppress and destroy the enemy support units, and then send your best infantry to clear the city. From there on, use your bombers to pick off enemy tanks, and send your own tanks, which by this point should be well concentrated on the southern bank of the river, to finish off the enemy armor and take those remaining objectives in the north. In any case, whichever route you take, don't split your forces. And speaking of Grodno and Bialystok, unless you want to capture some of that Soviet equipment, it's enough to block Grodno with 1 infantry unit. The AI ally will do its job well. Finally, even if you clear all of the airfields around Grodno, you will have to deal with a couple of Soviet bombers around the time you reach Baranovichy. Make sure you're prepared for that. Alright, remember that go for the bottom rule from the last mission? Well, it applies here too. The scenario is trying to pull you towards the northern path, encircling the city. There are these little Soviet counterattacks and everything, but the problem is that approaching it from the south is much easier. Most of the AA guns there are on the southern bank of the river, and there's that hill very conveniently placed southwest of the city, where you can plop your large caliber guns and just dominate the area with them. So the actual plan for the battle is to advance towards Orsha. There will be a bit of a welcoming committee there, so blast it to smithereens, and then set up a bridging unit to cross the river right behind Orsha, instead of the Soviet one. Then leave a couple of units to defend the town. There will be a few stray Soviet units trying to attack towards the west, and move your entire force towards the southern part of Smolensk. You'll face a few enemy planes here, so make sure you bring a couple of fighters. Plopping an airfield in the middle of that area is also a good idea. And from there on, your immediate milestones are to take over that hill, destroy enemy AA supports in the area, and then clear the southern part of the city, blocking all crossings. Your next push will be towards Glinka, but I highly recommend not being rash and regrouping before you cross that tributary. The Soviets have many tanks and AA guns there, so make sure you muster all of the firepower you can get. Here, it's also a good idea to destroy the last Soviet bridging unit just east of the city. Drop a paratrooper unit there, destroy the AA gun in the area, and block the enemy tanks from crossing the river from the north. Once you take over Glinka, pivot towards Yartsevo and use your bridging pioneers to cross the river behind the village. Setting up an airfield nearby and blasting all those tanks to bits with your bombers is also a good idea. Once Yartsevo is yours, send infantry from the southern part of Smolensk to the north, which by this point should have been bombarded by your mortars for many turns, and their defenses should be really weak. The Battle of Yelnya is remarkable for the fact that it was the first land battle in World War II that the Germans lost and had to retreat pretty significantly in. But that's just in measly real life. Let's see if we can turn the tide in the game. Now, this is largely a defensive scenario, so the biggest question is where to position your troops. And my first bit of advice is while you can't really protect Shirkovo and Hachevka, you shouldn't let Yelnya fall into enemy hands. That airfield, it just looks too good and too well positioned. So leave your best anti-tank bombers in Yelnya. Use the deployment slots on the northern bank of the river to plop your best tanks and AT guns, and deploy most of the rest of your tanks and most of your artillery around Glinka so that they can quickly bolster the defenses in Yelnya. Because this is the main direction of Soviet attack, and this is where you will stem the tide. Protect that airfield, use your bombers, and use the terrain to trap and destroy enemy tanks with your infantry. Now, on to the south. See those hills on the opposite opposite side of the river, yes, the enemy will use artillery there, and that means that you shouldn't position your defenders next to the river. Especially in that little salient at the bottom, you'll get into crossfire there very easily. And we'll have to use your bombers to rescue those guys. So position them about halfway from Roslavel. And once you see that you're winning at Yelnya and you can already move your troops southeast from it, you attack with your Roslavel screening troops as well. From there on, you take over the remaining objectives and prepare for an occasional enemy attack every 3 or 4 rounds. These are going to come from a randomly selected Soviet deployment point every time, and none of these attacks is going to be serious. Oh, and make sure you bring a couple of fighters, because in addition to the recons, the Soviets will field a few fighters and bombers of their own in the middle of the mission. The name Stalin Line always makes me chuckle because it sounds like a painting technique whereby you dab your finger in paint and then draw a line on a map and expect a system of mighty fortifications to suddenly pop up in that area. Anyway, there are 2 points you need to keep in mind when dealing with this first mission in the Army Group North branch. 1. If attacked head-on right from the start of the mission, Gulbene is a death trap. The Soviets have amassed a lot of artillery there and AA supports, and you will be promptly attacked there by not 1 but 2 spearheads attacking from opposite directions. One will come from Pskov, and the other one is a group of tank units that, as far as I understand, is scripted to move from Riga towards Gulbene Pskov right from the start of the mission. And if you look at Riga, it looks like it's pretty easy to encircle and not particularly easy to attack head-on. So your initial objectives are to set up a perimeter around Riga on the southern bank of the river and plop a bridging unit right next to that place where obviously a bridge used to be. This will open your route towards the very conveniently placed airfields and to a bunch of grounded Soviet planes there. You will also be able to flank the enemy units moving from Riga to Gulbene there. I also recommend to send a little detachment of troops, a couple of tanks, maybe an infantry, to the airfield east of Gulbene. Beside Riga, this is the only place where there are grounded Soviet planes left. And if you destroy them, you will face no resistance in the air whatsoever. Though don't forget about those in Riga as well. Once the center of the map is clear, and expect a few Soviet infantry units scattered all over that place, move most of your troops towards Tartu and Pernu. Pernu is not really well defended. It can be easily taken with 1 infantry unit and a mobile rocket artillery, whereas Tartu is going to be a bit of a problem. Apparently, the Estonians have revolted against their Soviet masters and are now fighting Soviet infantry in those forests. The problem is they're not your friends and you still have to take Tartu, and that forest now is full of enemy infantry. So make sure you bring your own there and as much artillery as you can spare, while your tanks and bombers are clearing the Gulbene area, which isn't that big of a deal at this point. And speaking of bombers, it's a very good idea to set up an airfield between Tartu and Pskov so that your Stukas can reach both. Welcome to the easiest mission we'll have today. I really enjoyed the Tallinn scenario for how different it is from the usual Soviet invasion fare, with endless plains and forests, but here you get to face the Soviet Navy. But first, let's look at our troop composition. Kick most of your tanks out and all of your ATs. The Soviets here have some mobile reserves and reasonably powerful tanks, including T-34s, but they're not numerous, and virtually all of them are concentrated in the western part of the town, and you can avoid them altogether. Do, though, load up on lots and lots of artillery and have enough infantry to cover it. You'll need it a lot. Resist the temptation of bringing any strategic bombers into this mission. Even though one of your objectives is destroying ships, you won't have to kill any warships. As the debriefing to this mission says, this is very much a Dunkirk scenario, and there will be plenty of transport ships that don't shoot back and die very easily if you attack them with tactical bombers. And I've found the bow fighters, you can actually get them in the Balkans to be very effective against them. Oh, and the Finnish speedboats are really good against them too, and they will also serve as reconnaissance for your bombers. Otherwise, the briefing kinda sorts the mission for you. The location for placing airfields it recommends is really good, and the most obvious direction of attack from the southeast is, I think, the best. Just make sure not to stray too far west and not face enemy tanks, and avoid getting any units that the AI considers to be high priority, like your artillery, anywhere near the coast. This will attract enemy warships and they'll just become a bloody nuisance throughout this mission. Oh, and no Soviet planes. Bomb, 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 bomb. Once Tallinn is in our hands, we advance east towards Leningrad. But the big Barbarossa plans have changed and we're only supposed to set up a perimeter around the city. And despite Novgorod and its surroundings being our main objective, it's reaching those fortification emplacements that's gonna take the most effort. The Soviet Air Force will be completely absent from this mission as well, but the tank threat is going to be relatively high, and I urge you to bring your best, strongest AT gun. If you've got a Sturm, make sure you bring it to this mission. So right from the start, you'll have to split your forces into 3 directions. 1, your best tanks, your strong AT gun, and your best bombers towards Krasnogvardeysk. This will be your main access point for the fortification emplacements. It's also a good idea to set up an airfield near Krasnogvardeysk so that your Stukas don't have to fly far. Your second group should contain most of your infantry units, your best infantry-based artillery, Warfarmen ideally. They will attack straight east to the objective north of Novgorod and then pivot southwards and take over the city. The Soviets have plopped a lot of, sometimes quite good infantry in the forests around Novgorod, and this is not a place for the tanks to be or do anything. Finally, send all of the rest of your troops. A tank, an artillery, maybe an infantry, and occasional bomber support to pick off those objectives west of Novgorod. Don't expect any real counterattacks in there, just take them over and be done with them, while your main infantry force handles the city. Now, back to Krasnogvardeysk, that little town in the middle of a swamp. It's hiding about 3 or 4 KV-1 units with strong heroes. Some of them have actually camouflage heroes, so don't think there isn't anything in there. You have to approach the town to discover them. And that's your reason to bring strong AT guns and bombers. It's all about destroying these tanks. Once you're done with them, you can advance further towards Leningrad. You really don't have to clear those areas around the objectives. And remember, as soon as you drive those construction lorries onto the objectives, they'll plop 2 bunkers, which are pretty strong. They will attract enemy fire and will sometimes help you with additional firepower there. So it might be a good idea to bring in the lorries as you're destroying the enemy there. And this is it for today. I'm really looking forward for the last section of the DLC. I hear that the Soviet resistance is gonna get stiffer and stiffer, as it should, and I just can't wait to break through those defensive lines. Like and subscribe, and see you next week. Lieutenant Gerhard for the Finn!